We're coming off our first winning week of the year on Beat the Book. Let's go for two in Week 17 of the NFL. Welcome to Beat the Book, brought to you by the Turf Club at Northern Quest Resort and Casino. I'm your host, Keith Osso, and after 2 or 3 abysmal weeks, we finally turned it around. We're 2-1 in our picks last week. The only thing we missed, the Seattle Seahawks game, because they lost at home to the Bears with a third-string quarterback, and Seattle continues to be just horrible this season. There's no other way to put it. We've talked about having guests on our show and getting a different perspective. Well, the guy that taught me how to gamble, and we talked a lot in his time here at KXLY. You may remember him, our former weekend sports anchor, Will Sherritt. He's our first ever guest here on Beat the Book, and we talk about his strategies and what he looks for in making his bets. Well, Will, thanks for joining us. You're our first ever guest on Beat the Book. I had to go to you because you're the guy that taught me, so now people can blame me and blame you for all the picks that I give them. So, how you been?
I've been great. And as you were making that introduction and you told me that the record was 1-5 so far that you've given out, I said, okay, I'm going to be the reason to blame. And you're right. And frankly, I should be. So.
We have been terrible, but we are coming off a 2-1 week. So we're inching our way back to 500.
That's what it takes. Chipping away.
That's
winning
right.
weeks are great. You can't ever complain about a winning week.
Hey, let me ask you a couple questions. First, I want to ask you, where I know your story, but I want to know for everybody else how you got involved in sports gambling and betting, and how long you've been looking at lines and things like that.
Yeah, no, it's certainly an interesting time to be someone who loves to gamble and loves to look at numbers, because it's all out in the open now, right? It's great. I don't think anyone's arguing about the commercialization of it and how it's becoming legal in so many states, and eventually will be legal everywhere. But I do certainly miss a little bit of the days when I first started. I was a little guy growing up. My dad always got the parlay cards dropped off under the mat. They were there Tuesday morning, and we had to get them out by Thursday morning. Put them right under the welcome mat there, and if you won from the week before, there'd be your money in there, and more oftentimes than not, there was no money in there, just 4 parlay cards for that week. So that's how I really got started. Just $5 parlays, just trying to figure out what this all meant. Back in middle school and growing up, and certainly things that have evolved so much. There's so much access now to data that you didn't have, or at least I didn't have so long ago. So it's fun, and I do love that ESPN now, they have the lines up when they're putting the matchups, whether it's College Game Day or on the bottom line, things like that. So it's just so much fun to see the exposure and the way the space is growing, and get to do things like this now, and you and I get to talk about things we might have talked about in the shadows before. Now we can come out and talk about it, for better or worse, for others to hear.
Well, that's the part that's cool. Did you think even 5 years ago, you're working with me, and we kind of had to have a talk like, we shouldn't be talking about this on social media because it's representing the station and it's not legal here, that kind of stuff. And now, as you said, it's on ESPN. I'm watching Red Zone the other day. They're giving you second half over-unders. I mean, how fast it's gone from, as you said, in the shadows to mainstream. I mean, can you believe how fast this has happened?
I haven't, no, but I guess if you sit back and look at it from a 30,000 foot view, it makes sense that people in the government and anyone would want to get their hands on money that's out there, right? On this multi-billion-dollar industry. And I think too, for the consumer, right? Like, you feel more comfortable having your money at a book like FanDuel or DraftKings or something like that that's reputable, instead of the bookie or the offshore, things like that. So I think for everybody, it's great how things have progressed. And frankly, it should have been like that. There's you can go back in history and look at some of the things that have happened, and whether it's shaving scandals or what have you, and you understand why there was that apprehension, right, for leagues and especially NCAA,
right,
bodies like that. But it's so regulated now. It is a big business, and so it only makes sense that everyone's going to have more access to to things like this. And your industry and what I do too, media wise, like why wouldn't these networks want to have people caring in the second half, maybe for reasons, just, hey, it all kind of makes sense as to why it's kind of come to the forefront like it has.
We discussed on this podcast, I guess this is a couple weeks ago, that if you're new to sports gambling, you're going to find out how much fun a Browns Ravens fourth quarter that's a 10 point, like the game's over, but there's 30 seconds left. And if you have sports gambled before, you know the pain of the last 30 seconds when your team's up by 10. I just think it adds more fun. And you're right. Why would broadcasts not want you to stick around in a blowout if the line is 23 and they're at 21? You're going to stick around now instead of flipping over to another game.
Absolutely. I love too that the announcers are sprinkling it in now. That's a significant play to some is a phrase you'll hear at times, with a late touchdown or field goal and swinging either the total or the side. So I love that too, because, going back to our previous little part of this conversation, like the bad beat stuff, a lot of the like Van Pelt's opening month, like the Chris Fowler bit in there, he is hearkening back to that Northwestern Ohio State game was from 10 years ago or so, and he's dancing around it. but now it's just so common, so I love that as well.
Well, Brett Musburger, the OG of that, right? I mean, he's been dropping that stuff for years, and I just didn't know what he was talking about.
Right. Yeah, he really is, and it's great. There's always a team total or a second half total that is coming into play, so it makes everything fun.
So when you sit down, well, first of all, let's talk about this. I called the last 2 weeks ago. I said this is the most difficult NFL betting weekend in NFL history because of COVID really started to go nuts, and so you didn't know who was going to play and who wasn't. And of course, it took the week before and went on steroids last week. You had Travis Kelce out and Austin Eckler out, and all these different lines are affected because of COVID. And now you've got Carson Wentz this week testing positive, and they're not testing positive. He's in COVID protocol. We're waiting to see what that really means. But it's hard to bet early in the week now because you don't know who's going to be here later. Now you could get lucky and your line could be very, very good. But what I've seen so far is it's going the other way. It's really kind of hurting you for betting early. How do you adjust your betting now because of what's going on?
It's such a good point because that's really where the value is. If you're someone who can get into the market early before the bigger money comes in later in the week, there can be a lot of advantages. Getting those plays down on Mondays, Tuesdays, early in the week. Now, to your point, that's less of an advantage. One way I've been trying to look at it is, it's kind of 50-50 either way, whether COVID's going to hit you or not. Mm-hmm. So to me, if you like a side and you feel like there's an advantage there, it's almost worth, at least to me, starting to build that position and then seeing how COVID takes it. Because to your point, you just said this, you could like a number early in the week, get some money down, and it could move your way, and you could find, a field goal plus worth of value, depending on who's out and things like that. So the COVID stuff is tough, but it really can go either way, impacting you. So I've been trying to start early in the week, still build something, and then if you have to buy out, you have to buy out. But it makes it even tougher to do all this stuff. Same with the bowl games. Opt-outs are always the difficult thing with bowl games, right? You don't know who's going to play. You'll get some sense of it, of seeing the way things go, but now add COVID on top of that, it makes it even more difficult. So, it's a wild time. I feel like alerts and Twitter have never been more valuable of a resource for someone betting than it is today, right?
Yeah, if you're betting sports and you're not on Twitter, I think you're putting yourself behind right now.
Right.
So when you sit down for a week, this is where I really want to get into is your strategy and how you handicap. When you sit down for the week, are you saying, I want to bet this game, and then you go look at the line, or are you looking at the line and then figuring out, like, what's your process of how you go about? Because you have a very wide net when you gamble, especially with college football. You'll be up to 12 games a weekend or something. Like, how do you just choose what that's going to be?
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's really the fun of it, right? You and I aren't aren't betting life-changing sums.
Right.
It's really to have action on a game, defend a position that you think is the right one, or where you see maybe some value in the market where you can try and capitalize on that. I approach college and NFL a little differently. I don't bet the NFL quite as much, and you and I have talked about this. I obviously am not as sharp as the top guys who do it, and so the top guys in the industry are, you're betting a point to a half a point edge that you see. I'm not making numbers like that, so it's a little harder for me to play the number side in the NFL. I think especially with the NFL, it's the buy low, sell high principle is just so true in the NFL, because everyone remembers the public the last game they saw, right? And that is the thing that is stuck in everybody's head. And so in the league, going back to how tight the NFL lines are, I mean, it's the most efficient sports gambling market in the world. There's no tighter or more efficient market than the NFL. And so, if the public last saw a blowout and you're maybe getting a point, that's a huge edge when it comes to the NFL. College wise, I think that's my bread and butter. And I think where you can turn more of a profit, there's just more games. It's harder for bookmakers to stay on top of injuries, news, etc. when you have 126 teams or something in FBS. It can make it a little tougher, and you get more wild swings, right? You get a lot more variance in the college game. So when I'm looking at breaking down and handicapping a college game, there's so many stats that you can look at. College football data is probably my number one website where I go, and some of the key things I'll look at are line of scrimmage and explosive plays. To me, those are really defining things on both sides of the ball in terms of when I'm looking at handicapping the game and then going from there. Turnovers, all that stuff, that to me be random. I don't think you can really bank on that. And if one team, has a huge plus or minus turnover wise in either direction, you have to assume over time that's going to come back towards the middle. So, I really look at line of scrimmage. And not to get too deep into it, but you can go on sites like College Football Data and look at things like havoc rates, line yards, stuff rate. All of those are measuring line play. You can do that on the offensive or defensive side of the ball. And so you can really look and match those up. And if an offensive line has huge advantages over a defensive line, well, that's a really good starting place. Explosive plays too are another thing that I really look at, because that's just it changes how efficiently and how quickly you score. That can make a huge difference. So those are really the things I look at, and then you can go from there and break it down as well to how teams run the ball and how teams defend the run, and break it out as much as you want. But to me, at least for my purposes, there's a lot more specific data that I'm able to tap in the college side versus the NFL. So I don't know if that helps, but those are really the two: line of scrimmage, big plays, and then you can go from there.
See, that's what we like to talk about here, is different strategies that people use to try to get people thinking how they want to strategize with their money. Because I don't think it's as simple as like when you do an office pool on who's going to win this week and they're going to put money on that. I mean, you can do that. That can absolutely be a strategy, but I'm trying to learn from different people on what their strategies are and what they're looking at, because the more you learn here, I feel the better off you are. It's the one thing in a casino that your education and knowledge can actually help you win. I could be knowledgeable as heck about a slot machine. It doesn't help me because it's random, right? You can have strategies in blackjack, but on a 5-card deck or a 5-deck, shoe, it doesn't really help you that much unless you're doing things that are going to get you kicked out of the casino. But sports betting, I sometimes it works against me because I overthink things, but it does. Your knowledge and your education on what your involvement in sports actually helps you in wagering, and the more knowledge you have, the better off. So that's kind of the strategy differences in different people. I can't wait to see throughout the season how different people approach these things. The NFL, I'm stick with the NFL a lot because the college here still is tricky in what we can and can't bet. No in-state teams, no in-state games, that kind of stuff. But with the NFL, I guess this could be for either. When you see a line, and you and I have talked about this because we used to play the game in the car. Okay, Gonzaga just won. They're going to play.
Right.
They're going to play St. Mary's on Tuesday. What do we think the line's going to be? And then see how close to the actual line we were. And generally, we were pretty close. When you see a line, so we're thinking, both of us are thinking, 17, and then the line comes out 12. Okay, and we've talked about it. If it doesn't make any sense, I'm not touching it, right? I mean, they know something I don't know. Is that talk about that strategy when you see a line that to you just is like, whoa, that doesn't look right.
Yeah, no, I think when you see things that don't look right, there's probably a reason why. Yeah, like you said, they're kind of telling you the way that the market's going to go, and so oftentimes it's either smart to follow that momentum or get the heck out of the way because you don't want to be in front of that. And I think it's important too in the NFL. It's like, again, going back to the public seeing what they last saw. That's their view of the team. Look at the standings right now in the NFL. Everybody is 500 or right around it. Mm-hmm. So I think when you're gambling, that's an important thing to remember too. Is there's some outliers on either ends, right? Like the Jags and Jets, obviously, are an atrocity. I don't need to tell anybody that. The Bucks, the Chiefs, there's a few teams on the other end. But for the most part, 75% of the NFL, they're all the same. I mean, and there's a reason that the lines reflect that. Last weekend we saw more double-digit NFL lines than I've seen in a while. If you're really watching the league, it's mostly 3 to 7 points, and that's what you're looking at. And so last week was almost a surprise. There was 10s, 12s, right. Lots of big totals or lots of big numbers out there. So yeah, I think it's important to remember that a lot of these teams are pretty similar. And so if one team got blown out the week before and the other team's coming off a big win, well, maybe you're going to get a point and a half edge there that you wouldn't have gotten because that's what the public last saw. Now you can look at headlines, and then that can tell you, hey, well, last week they were hanging a 3 and now this is over 4. Why is that worth a point and a half correction? And so that can tell you too, because remember the casinos aren't just hanging numbers. They're also hanging numbers that they want people to play, right? And so unlike DFS where you're playing against other people, the casinos they have to factor in the public, and so that can be to your advantage sometimes.
I've watched games with you. We'll take the Dallas game last week, for example. Dallas is just boat racing Washington, right? And you'd look over at me and go, I can't wait to fade Dallas next week. Because they were so impressive that everybody's going to jump on Dallas next week, right? Even though their matchup's a lot tougher. So I mean, I've sat with you and watched you during a game go, I'm totally fading them next week. And then you do, and generally you're right. It's because that could be a point or two on the line because people are going to go, Dallas, they're rolling. I'm going to throw everything I got at them. Well, it was a perfect storm too. Let's not forget those things. So, Will, I gotta let you. We're gonna let you run. I thank you for joining us on your Christmas vacation. We appreciate it. I really look forward to having you back later on in the season when we could start maybe focusing a little bit more toward basketball, things like that. With football now winding down, but I assume that you're rolling tide throughout the college football playoff.
Yeah, it's hard to get in front of that freight train. There was a gift from the gambling gods 2 weeks ago when Nick Saban was catching a touchdown against Kirby. When was the last time Nick Saban was a dog, let alone catching a touchdown? So don't think you're going to see that number again. If anyone capitalized on that.
That was the first bet. That was the first bet in Turf Club history at Northern Quest Resort Casino. Rob Sacre taking Alabama. That was the first bet in the history of the sports book there, and obviously a winner for Sacre.
I love that. Yeah, you can do pretty well with your money over the years back in Nick Saban and the Tide. So yeah, looking forward to that. And thanks so much for having me on. Hopefully some more winners you're going to be dishing out in the future, and looking forward to following along. So appreciate it.
Thank you to Will. A lot of fun catching up with him, talking sports, talking a little bit of sports wagering. And I like the point about how this was something that used to be in the shadows, and now you're seeing it not just here in the public, but you're seeing it on ESPN, you're seeing it on the NFL Network as people continue to embrace what is becoming more and more legalized across the country, including right here in the state of Washington. And thanks to our friends at the Turf Club at Northern Quest Resort Casino, we have a place to wager on sports here locally. So our picks this week, going to go 3 more picks this week, staying in the NFL. Las Vegas, a 7-point underdog on the road, taking on Indianapolis. The news today out of Indy is quarterback Carson Wentz is on the COVID list. As we all know, he's unvaccinated. More than likely, that would make him unavailable to play this weekend. But even if he does play, if he's a close contact and not a positive case, we're talking about a guy that's not going to practice all week long. You'd think even more effort would be going to Taylor, the running back. Now he leads the NFL in rushing. But the Las Vegas Raiders, the last 2 weeks, the number 1 rush defense in the NFL, and that was against Denver, who has 2 good running backs, and Cleveland, who bases their entire offense on running the football. So I think Las Vegas can keep it close enough with Josh Jacobs coming off his first 100-yard game of the season. They continue to feed him, and the possibility of the return of tight end Darren Waller this week. If that is added into this offense, Las Vegas should be able to stay within the 7 points that they are getting on the road. I'll take Las Vegas plus 7 as pick number 1. Number 2, you have Minnesota at Green Bay, divisional opponents. Not really going to go with the 6.5-point line here. I'm going to go with the over-under, which is 47.5 points. Now, Minnesota has hit the over 5 of their last 6 games. Green Bay has hit the over 4 of their last 5 games. And the over 47.5, not huge considering these 2 teams played just 5 weeks ago and their point total was 65. So give me the over 47.5. 2 offenses that are pretty good, 2 defenses that have been up and down all year. And of course, we got to pick the Seahawks game as we've done all year. I think we're yet to get them correct. Seattle is 7-point favorite at home against the 2-win Detroit Lions. I'm taking the Lions. Give me 7 points. Seattle doesn't deserve that against anybody right now, the way they're playing. If you can lose to a third stringer on Chicago, you certainly can stay within 7 if you're the Detroit Lions, who are playing extremely hard down the stretch, trying to play and get that new style of play where they're biting kneecaps off in Detroit. I predict that they will stay within 7 of the Seahawks, who honestly, we'll see how much motivation they have playing out the next 2 games because they're out of the playoffs and they have 2 games. Mathematically, they cannot get in the playoffs. They've not been in this position before. I'll take the Lions, who have a lot more to play for as they're trying to build something, as Seattle might be on the verge of hitting the reset button this offseason. We'll have to wait and see. That's it for this week on Beat the Book. We'll see how things go. As always, have fun with the games this weekend, and good luck on your wagering.